The great chamber of the Galactic Council was not built for beings like Captain Lee Jun. The air was perfectly still, odorless, and cool. The light came from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows, designed to soothe the light-sensitive eyes of the majority. For Jun, it felt like being inside a massive, sterile egg. He stood on a circular platform, the sole representative of humanity. His simple blue duty uniform a stark contrast to the shimmering robes, glistening carapaces, and floating crystalline forms of the assembled council. Across the vast space, on a raised dais, sat Councillor Valer. Valer was a Thulaner, a species of silicate biology that lived for millennia. His body resembled smoothed, gray stone, with faint, slow-pulsing lines of light within. His voice, when it came, was the sound of tectonic plates grinding, translated by the air itself. "Captain Lee Jun of the Terran vessel Odyssey," Valer intoned, each word heavy and final. "You stand before this unified body to receive its judgment on the species known as humanity." Jun's back was straight, his hands clasped behind him. He had been here for weeks, listening to the accusations. He felt the weight of billions of eyes on Earth, watching through the live data stream. He also felt the cool, detached scrutiny of the council members who saw him not as an individual, but as a fascinating and problematic specimen. "The charges are sustained," Valer continued, the lights in his chest pulsing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. "Unchecked technological escalation. Cultural contamination of pre-FTL societies. The most egregious, the willful alteration of your own genetic template. You do not seek harmony with the universe. You seek to break it and remake it to your liking. This is a sickness of the spirit." Jun took a controlled breath. "Counselor, with respect, what you call a sickness, we call survival. We call progress. Every species here evolved. We chose to guide that evolution. Is our tool-making so different?" A soft, chiming sound of disapproval rippled through the chamber. A being of swirling gas, Exiled, floated forward. Its voice was a whisper of wind. "You created weapons that can crack a continent within a century of discovering electricity. You listened to the stars, and your first thought was not wonder, but to build louder transmitters to shout back. You are children playing with forces you cannot comprehend. We learned," Jun insisted, his calm voice cutting through the whispers. "We unified. We have not had a global war in 3 generations. Our first FTL probe was a mission of peace." "Peace?" Valer's stone face did not change, but the lights within him flared. "Your peaceful probe to the Kesari homeworld contained archival data. Within one of their solar cycles, they had overthrown their natural hierarchy, inspired by your chaotic concepts of individual liberty. Their society is now in fragments. This is your peace. A wildfire." Jun felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The Kesari mission was supposed to be a triumph. He had seen the images himself, the ancient, slow-moving Kesari studying the probe's databanks. He thought they were learning about art, about music. He didn't know they would fixate on human history's revolutions. "You gave them knowledge without context," said another counselor, a delicate being with iridescent wings. "You do not understand stability. You value change for its own sake. Your very biology is in flux. You edit your genes to remove diseases today. What will you edit for tomorrow? Strength? Intelligence? You will make yourselves into monsters. So we should suffer and die from ancient fixable errors?" Jun's composure was slipping. "We should not strive to be better?" "Better is a subjective term," Valer stated. "Stability is an objective good. The Galactic Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years by adhering to principles of natural development and non-interference. Humanity, in its current state, is incompatible with these principles. You are a destabilizing vector. The pronouncement hung in the artificial air. June knew what was coming. He had heard the rumors, excommunication, sanctions, but the scale of it still stole the breath from his lungs. Therefore, Valere boomed, the chamber vibrating. It is the judgment of this council that humanity shall be placed under permanent exile. Your homeworld, Earth, and all associated colonies within your native solar system will be quarantined. A static field will be erected at the heliopause boundary. It will permit the passage of light and basic radiation, but will collapse any attempt at faster-than-light travel. You will remain in your cradle, to mature or to fade, away from the greater galaxy. The silence that followed was absolute. June's mind raced. A cage. They were putting all of humanity in a cage. No more stars. No more connections. A slow, stagnant end. You can't do this, June said, his voice raw. You are condemning an entire species for what? For trying? For not being like you? We are preserving the whole, the Exiled whispered, its form contracting with finality. You are afraid. June shouted, the echo bouncing oddly in the acoustically perfect room. He pointed at the assembled council. You are afraid of our energy, of our questions. You built a perfect, quiet garden, and you call it a universe. We are not a sickness. We are life. And life grows. His words fell into a void of profound indifference. Valere observed him as a geologist might observe an interesting, but ultimately pointless, tremor. The judgment is irrevocable. The static field generators are already en route. Implementation will commence in 72 of your hours. Your vessel, the Odyssey, is permitted to return to Earth before the field is activated. After that, no ship shall leave, and no ship shall enter. You are dismissed. The platform beneath June's feet began to glow, preparing to teleport him back to the diplomatic quarters. He felt a surge of helpless fury. This was it. The end of the human dream, decreed by beings who had forgotten what dreaming was. He looked at Valere one last time. The Thaloner's stony gaze was already turning to the next item on the agenda, some minor trade dispute between two ancient species. Humanity was already a closed-file dot as the light of the transporter enveloped him. June didn't feel despair. He felt a cold, hard certainty crystallize in his heart. They thought they were putting humans in a box. They thought stillness would pacify them. They had not read human history very well at all. They had just given a species of builders, fighters, and stubborn dreamers a single, massive, unifying problem, a wall around their sun. And deep in his soul, June knew humanity's first and only thought would be a simple, focused, and terrifying one. The silence that fell over Earth was not one of surrender. It was the silence of a breath being held before a great exertion. The view from the planet was now subtly wrong. The stars did not just twinkle. At the edge of the solar system, they shimmered and bent, distorted by the immense invisible barrier of the static field. The Galactic Council's quarantine was in place. Humanity was alone. The initial global panic was channeled, with a speed that would have shocked the Council, into a new entity, the Terran Reclamation Directorate. Old national borders blurred, then vanished under the weight of a single desperate purpose. They called the first century after the exile the Silent Century, not because they were quiet, but because no one in the galaxy was listening. Li Jun returned to Earth a broken man in the eyes of many. He had been the face of their failure. He did not retire. He went to the great orbital shipyards where his old ship, the Odyssey, was now permanently docked, a museum of a future that had been stolen. He stood on the observation deck, looking at the skeletal beginnings of new, larger ships. "We will not just sit here," a voice said beside him. It was Kim Yuna, the head of the Unified Genetics Project. She was young, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. They exiled us for changing ourselves. So we will change. Not for war at first. For survival. To live out there, she said, pointing not to the stars, but to the harsh, airless rocks of the solar system. Across the void, on Pluto, Park Min-soo led a different kind of effort. His research station, buried deep in the frozen nitrogen, was dedicated to one task: understanding the enemy's wall. The static field was a masterpiece of subtle energy manipulation. It did not block matter. It detected the specific quantum resonance of known FTL drives and collapsed the field around them, dropping a ship back into normal space. It was a polite, efficient cage. Min-soo, a man who spoke in equations and saw the universe as a solvable puzzle, gathered the brightest minds. They think in limits, he told his weary team, diagrams of the field glowing around them. Their technology is about defining what cannot be done. Ours has always been about finding a new way to do it. They gave us the blueprint for their lock. We just need to find a key that doesn't fit its keyhole. The key, he theorized, was not to be more subtle, but to be overwhelmingly crude. If the field was a delicate net designed to catch butterflies, they would build a hammer. Back on Earth, resources were being mobilized on a scale unimaginable before the exile. The great shipyards expanded, fed by robotic mining operations on the Moon and Mars. The first major project was not a warship, but a collection hub, the Mercury Solar Harvest. Millions of mirrors and energy collectors were built, forming a shimmering swarm around the sun, catching its raw power and beaming it to hungry construction projects across the system. A young engineer named Choi Han-yul worked in the cavernous maintenance bays of the Odyssey. She had been a junior systems officer on the diplomatic mission. Now, she spent her days taking the ship apart, studying its council-bought FTL drive. She felt its failure in her bones. One day, staring at the harmonic stabilizer, she had a violent thought. What if, instead of trying to match the field's frequency to pass through it, you screamed a frequency so loud and wrong it made the field itself vibrate apart? Her design schematics were messy, fueled by anger and caffeine. She called it an M-jammer, for molecular harmonic jammer. It was not a graceful tool. It was a device meant to create a localized quantum screech, a burst of disruptive energy. She took the idea to Min-soo's team on Pluto. Min-soo looked at her wild diagrams, then at the intense young woman. "It is a brutish solution," he said. "Will it work?" Han-yul asked, her voice tight. "It might," he admitted, "but their field is vast. Your jammer, as designed, would only make a small hole for a very short time. And the energy feedback? It could destroy the ship carrying it." Han-yul set her jaw. "Then we build a ship that can survive it." While the physicists and engineers worked on breaking the wall, Kim Yoon's biologists worked on breaking their own limits. If humanity was to spread within its cage, it needed to live where it was not meant to live. Gene therapies were developed, not for enhancement as the Council feared, but for adaptation. Modified hemoglobin to thrive in thin-air environments on Mars, subdermal mesh to regulate, body temperature in the extremes of asteroid outposts. A slow, careful rewriting of the human body to make it at home in the dark, cold places the Council had ignored. Lee Jun, growing older, became a symbol of the bridge between the old dream and the new reality. He traveled between Earth, Mars, and the research colonies, his speeches short and plain. "They think they put us in a bottle to watch us stagnate," he would say, his voice still commanding. "They do not understand. A bottle is just a smaller universe. And we are still the humans who looked at the sky and decided to build a ladder." The decades passed. The silent century was not silent at all. It rang with the sounds of industry echoing in vacuum. Cities grew under the red sky of Mars. The Jupiter Orbital Array, became a bustling hub. Its shipyards building vessels of human design thick-hulled, powered by immense fusion torches, meant for hauling ice from the moons or asteroids to the refineries. And always, on Pluto, Park Min-soo and his team, now joined permanently by Choi Han-yul, worked. The torrent drive was their answer. It did not gently slip between dimensions. It used terrifying amounts of the energy harvested from Mercury to punch a temporary, brute-force tunnel through space-time. It was inefficient, violent, and left a detectable scar of radiation in its wake. It was the exact opposite of Council technology. It was a scream in the quiet room of the galaxy. 103 years after the Exile, the first test ship, the Unyielding Spirit, was ready in the fortified yards of Jupiter. It was ugly, all sharp angles and heavy armor plating, built to withstand stresses that would tear a Council ship apart. At its heart was Min-soo's torrent drive. On its nose, like a crude battering ram, was Han-yul's maid jammer. Lee Jun was there, aged but unbent, invited by Admiral Lee Suman, his granddaughter, who now commanded the Seoul Defense Fleet. He stood with Kim Yuna, whose own work had allowed a crew to survive the predicted G-forces. "The Council's sensors will see the test," Suman said, her face grim on the view screen from her flagship. "They will see the energy surge." "Let them see," Jun said, his eyes fixed on the bulky silhouette of the Unyielding Spirit. "Let them see the first swing of the hammer." The command was given. The Unyielding Spirit, captained by a veteran of the asteroid mines, powered up. It did not move with silent grace. It thrummed with raw power, a deep vibration felt through the decks of nearby stations. It turned its nose toward the edge of the solar system, towards the invisible barrier that had caged a species for a century. On Pluto, Min-soo and Han-yul watched their monitors, hands clenched. On Earth, billions held their breath. The Unyielding Spirit accelerated, a spear thrown at an unseen wall. The galaxy outside, if it was watching, likely saw only a small, futile flare of energy from a quarantined and forgotten system. They expected nothing. They understood nothing of the silent, century-long forge fire that had been burning in the dark. The Unyielding Spirit was not a ship built for beauty. It was a massive, angular wedge of reinforced titanium and ceramic plating, covered in the scars and carbon scoring of 1,000 stress tests. Inside, the air smelled of ozone, hot metal, and the sharp, clean scent of recycled atmosphere. Captain Andejo, a man who had spent 30 years piloting ore haulers in the asteroid belt, sat in the command chair. His hands, thick and calloused, rested calmly on the armrests. He had volunteered for this. Everyone on board had. On the main screen, the starfield was clear, but a faint, rippling distortion marked the edge of the prison. The static field. It was 100,000 kilometers ahead, invisible to the naked eye, but screaming its presence on every sensor. "Approaching field boundary in 10 minutes, his navigator. Ji-hoon said, his voice tight. "Sound general alert. Jammer crew, report status." Anne's voice was a low rumble dot in the forward bay. Choi Han-yul, now a woman with streaks of gray in her hair and a fierce intensity in her eyes, oversaw her life's work. The M-jammer was not a weapon you aimed. It was a series of bulky, heavily shielded modules connected by conduits as thick as a man's torso. It hummed with a dangerous, unstable energy. Jammer is charged and stable. Resonance coils are cinched to the last field scan from Pluto. We are ready to scream. Back on Pluto, Park Min-soo watched from the control center. Data streams flowed around him. This was the final test of his torrent drive theory. He had run the simulations 1,000,000 times. 40% of them ended in the ship being torn apart by the conflicting energies. He said a silent, secular prayer to the laws of physics. "Torrent drive is primed," the engineer on the Spirit reported. Energy levels from the Mercury swarm are at 100%. Holding in capacitors. Good, and said. He looked at the image of the distortion on his screen. All hands, brace for turbulence. This will not be a smooth ride. Outside the static field, a single Galactic Council sentinel watched. It was an automated drone, a sleek silver oval, placed there over a century ago to monitor the quarantine. Its programming categorized the energy spike from the human ship as a probable reactor malfunction. It began to record, its simple intelligence expecting to log another quiet failed experiment from the volatile apes. It noted the approach. It noted the power buildup. It was not programmed to feel alarm. Field boundary in 1 minute, Ji-hoon said. Jammer, on my mark, and commanded. Mark. Haniel slammed a physical switch down. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a deep, sub-audible groan vibrated through the entire hull of the unyielding spirit. The lights flickered. On the external cameras, space in front of the ship began to writhe. The static field, designed to absorb and dissipate delicate FTL signatures, was confronted with something raw and violent. The M-jammer didn't try to match the field's frequency. It attacked it with a chaotic burst of overlapping, discordant quantum states. The field didn't open. It shattered. A jagged, lightning-like tear of purple-white energy ripped across space, emanating from the nose of the human ship. The Council Sentinel's sensors were instantly overloaded. The last thing it transmitted was a nonsensical scream of data before the feedback surge fried its circuits, sending it spinning, dead, into the void. Inside the spirit, alarms blared. A conduit in Haniel's bay exploded in a shower of sparks. Jammer is offline. We have a localized rupture, but it's unstable. It's collapsing, now, and roared over the din. Engage torrent drive, go. The engineer activated the sequence. The power from the Mercury swarm, stored in capacitors the size of buildings, was unleashed into the torrent drive's core. There was no gentle slip into another dimension. Space itself in front of the unyielding spirit was punched, twisted, and forced open. On the view screen, the stars didn't blur. They stretched into blinding lines, and then the screen went black as sensors shut down to protect themselves. The ship was not traveling. It was being hauled. The sound was a deep, metallic roar of stress. Every joint, every weld in the ship groaned. Crew members were slammed into their harnesses. The artificial gravity flickered and failed. For 37 seconds, it was a formless, crushing chaos. Then it was over. The roar ceased. The black screen cleared. A new starfield greeted them. A brilliant double star, blue and white, burned in the distance. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by the beep of systems coming back online. Report, Hen said, his voice hoarse. Structural integrity at 82%, an engineer called out. Multiple minor hull breaches, sealed. Torrent drive is spent, capacitors drained. But we are intact? Location? Ji-hoon worked his console, his hands shaking slightly. He cross-referenced the star patterns with the old, pre-Exiled charts. We are in the Proxima Centauri system, 4.2 light-years from Sol. We are outside the field. Sir, we are outside. A slow smile spread across Endejo's weathered face. It was not a smile of joy, but of grim, savage triumph. Send the pre-recorded burst signal back to Sol. One word only, through. On Pluto, the signal was received. Park Min-soo, the stoic scientist, let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and pounded his fist on the console. In the Jupiter shipyards, Admiral Lee Suman received the message and immediately began barking orders. The shipyards, already busy, shifted into a frenzy of activity they called war pace. On Earth, The word spread like lightning. People in streets, in homes, in the orbital habitats looked up. They had done it. The cage was broken, but there was no wild celebration. The feeling was deeper, more determined. A century of focused anger had found its outlet. Back in Proxima, the unyielding spirit was wounded but functional. Sensors swept the system. It was empty, as predicted. No council presence this far out. An ordered a drone launched to survey the third planet, a cold, rocky world dot as they worked. Henyo came to the bridge, her face smudged with soot. The jammer is a wreck. It's a single-use weapon. But we know the principle works. We can build better ones. And nodded. And the drive? We need to recharge from a local source. It will take months. The Council's drives are faster, more efficient. Efficiency isn't the point, Anne said, looking at the unfamiliar stars. They built a door and locked it. We just blew a hole in the wall next to it. They will be looking for us to come through the door. They won't understand the hole until it's too late. The message from the unyielding spirit was a spark in dry tinder. Across the Sol system, the Terran Reclamation Directorate was dissolved. In its place, a new entity formed, with a new, clearer purpose. It was not about reclaiming a place at the Council's table. It was about building their own. They called it the Terran Sol Empire. Its founding principle was simple, born from a century of exile. Never again. Admiral Suman became its first Archon. Li Jun, who had lived to see the hammer swing, passed away peacefully a week after the news, a smile on his face. His funeral was attended by billions, a silent, solemn vow echoing behind the mooring dot. The galaxy at large remained unaware. The destroyed Sentinel was noted by a maintenance AI in the Council's network. It was logged as a probable micrometeorite impact or internal failure. The species that had once judged humanity had long ago filed them away. They looked at the quiet, shimmering static field and saw a successfully contained problem. They did not see the forge fire within, and they did not hear the first, heavy footsteps of an empire that had just learned how to walk through walls. The galaxy, in its grand and ancient dance, did not notice the new star rising at first. The Terran Sol Empire did not announce itself. It simply was, while the Galactic Council's members focused on their slow, delicate diplomacy and their millennial-old treaties. Humanity was busy with steel and fire. Proxima Centauri became New Terra, a fortress world. Its atmosphere was unbreathable, its surface a frozen desert, but that did not matter. Humans, shaped by Kim Yuna's legacy of adaptation, walked its surface in powered exosuits or later with modified lungs that could process the thin air. They built not cities, but formidable citadels dug into mountains, their shipyards hidden in deep craters. They did not try to make the place beautiful. They made it strong. The Empire's expansion was not like the Council's careful exploration. It was a relentless, practical push. They targeted red dwarf stars, mineral-rich asteroid belts, and dead worlds, places the elegant, oxygen-dependent Council species found useless or unpleasant. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't file charters. They arrived with torrent drives that left scarred space in their wake. They surveyed, and they built. Their technology evolved in isolation, following a brutal logic. Council ships were sleek, designed for speed, subtlety, and long-term life support. Terran ships were different. They were angular and heavily armored, like flying fortresses. Their primary weapons were not elegant plasma lances, but mass drivers, giant magnetic rails that hurled chunks of tungsten at a fraction of light speed. A single hit could gut even a large ship. They were inefficient and short-ranged, but within that range, they were utterly devastating. Admiral, now Archon. Li Suman oversaw this growth from her command center on Mars. Her strategy was clear. We do not seek their approval. We create facts. A settled world, a working mine, a defended station, these are our arguments now. They were not alone in the galactic backwaters. They found other species, ones the Council had ignored, exploited, or deemed unworthy of membership. The Iltha, for example, were a hardy insectoid people who lived in the molten metal asteroid fields of a dying star. The Council saw them as primitive scavengers. A Terran mining convoy, led by Captain Moon Chewan, found them. There was no grand diplomacy. Chewan's ship shared its water and medical supplies when an Iltha clan was injured in a magnetic flare. In return, the Iltha showed the humans the richest veins of rare metals in the field. It was a simple trade. A pattern repeated with other lesser species. The Empire offered protection, sturdy human technology, and a simple deal. You keep your world your ways. We will trade fairly for what we need. And if anyone threatens you, they threaten us. It was not an alliance of philosophy, but of mutual need and demonstrated strength. Slowly, a network of loyal, fierce allies grew around the Empire's rough edges. The Galactic Council finally began to notice the disturbances. Unexplained gravitational scars near red dwarf stars. Unauthorized mining operations in unclaimed sectors. Strange, boxy ships spotted on the fringes of sensor ranges. They dismissed it at first as piracy or sensor ghosts. The idea that the humans, the exiles, were not only free, but building an industrial powerhouse was unthinkable. Their static field, according to all diagnostics, was still active and functional. The event that shattered their ignorance was the Krillax incursion. The Krillax horde was a perennial problem for the Council. A warrior species from a dense, high-gravity world, they raided frontier worlds for slaves and resources. Their ships were fast, their warriors fierce, and they used a chaotic form of FTL that made them hard to predict. The Council's strategy was one of containment. They fortified important worlds and tried to herd the Krillax into empty sectors of space. One such empty sector bordered a system the Terrans called Sanctuary, a world they had given to the P-Core, a gentle, plant-like species the Krillax had nearly wiped out. The Terrans had a small defense fleet there, 3 heavy cruisers led by the Steadfast, under Commander Park Min-soo's son, Jin. The Krillax fleet, 20 swift raiders, dropped out of FTL, expecting easy prey. They saw the 3 blocky, ugly Terran ships between them and the green world and dismissed them as slow, clumsy freighters. Commander Jin Park did not hail them. He followed standing orders. He activated the local gravity well generators, crude human devices that mimicked a planetary mass. The Krillax raiders, caught by surprise, found their agile ships suddenly sluggish, their escape jumps impossible. Then the Terran ships turned. Their thick armor plating slid aside, revealing rows of massive blunt barrels. The Krillax fired first, plasma bolts scarring the Terran hulls, but not penetrating. Jin gave the order. The mass drivers fired. There was no bright beam of light. There was only a series of deep, resonant thumps transmitted through the fabric of space. Tungsten slugs, each the size of a ground car, crossed the distance in a blink. A Krillax raider simply ceased to exist in a cloud of fragmented metal. Another was cut in half. The Terran firing was methodical, relentless, like miners breaking rock. The Krillax, bred for battle, did not retreat. They swarmed, trying to get inside the minimum range of the mass drivers. They boarded 1 Terran cruiser, the Resolute. What they found inside was not the spacious, well-lit corridors of a Council ship. It was a maze of tight, reinforced passageways, automated bulkhead doors that sealed behind them, and atmosphere vents that could be flooded with nerve gas. The human crew, wearing armored vac suits, fought in the claustrophobic dark with shotguns and cutting torches. It was a brutal, close-quarters slaughter. The Krillax, used to honorable duels in open spaces, were butchered. The battle was over in 20 minutes. 15 Krillak ships were destroyed. The rest fled, limping, into the void. The Terran fleet suffered heavy damage. 1 cruiser was crippled, and 70 humans died. But Sanctuary and the P-Corps were untouched. The Council observed the final moments of the battle from a long-range probe. They were stunned. The Krillaks had been humiliated, not by a superior fleet, but by 3 ships that fought with a kind of brutal, inelegant pragmatism they had never seen. The gravity wells, the kinetic weapons, the defensive interior design, it was all so crude. And it was all so devastatingly effective that an emergency session was called. Counselor Valer, older now, the lines of light in his stone body pulsing slower, reviewed the data. The evidence was undeniable. The energy signatures, the gravitational scars, the design philosophy, it all pointed back to one source. The exiles, Exiled delegate whispered, its gaseous form swirling in agitation. They have escaped. They have evolved. They have not evolved, Valer corrected, his grinding voice heavy with a new and unfamiliar emotion. Dread. They have specialized. They have become a weapon. While we sought harmony, they have been perfecting the art of breaking things. The galaxy was no longer a quiet garden. A new and formidable power had risen from the dark, not asking for a seat at the table, but building its own table from the shattered hulls of its enemies. The Terran Soul Empire was now a fact. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council felt the cold draft of a storm they did not know how to contain. The summons to the Galactic Council chamber on Galtar Prime was not a command this time. It was an invitation, laced with a tension that vibrated across the light years. The Terran Soul Empire received it, discussed it, and agreed to send a single envoy. There would be no delegation, no team of experts. Just one man. Ambassador Kang Daeun was not what the Council expected. He was not a fiery military leader like Suman, nor a grim scientist like Park Min-soo. He was a calm man in his late middle years, with thoughtful eyes and a quiet voice. He wore a simple, dark suit of human cut, unadorned by medals or jewels. His ship, the Diplomat, was a modified heavy cruiser. It did not try to hide its mass drivers or its armored plating as it entered Council space. It was a statement. We come to talk, but we are not weak. The chamber was the same as it had been over a century before. The same soft light, the same cool, still air. The same counselors, or their successors, watched from their tiers. At the center of the dais was Counselor Val, his stone form looking more weathered, the inner lights dimmer. He observed Kong as the human walked alone to the central platform. There was no fear in Kong's steps, only a weary certainty. Ambassador Kong, Valer's voice ground out, the translation filling the space. You stand before this council once more. Much has changed. Kong gave a small, polite nod. Much has changed, Counselor, and much has not. A ripple went through the assembly. The human's calm was disconcerting. The Terran Soul Empire has acted with unapproved aggression, began a sleek avian counselor. You have settled protected zones, armed primitive species, and engaged in unauthorized warfare with the Krillak's horde. Kong listened patiently. When the list was finished, he spoke. We have settled empty stars the Council ignored. We have traded fairly with independent species the Council abandoned. And we defended an ally from slavers the Council could only contain. We have broken no laws that we recognize. You recognize no law but your own. The avian snapped. That is correct, Kong said simply. The bluntness stunned the chamber into silence. He continued, his voice still mild. You gave us that lesson, counselors. When you exiled us, you taught us that your laws were not for our protection, but for our limitation. We learned it well. We built our own laws. They are simple. Defend your own, honor your agreements, and leave others in peace if they do the same. Valère leaned forward, the stone of his frame creaking. You have built an empire on violence. Your technology is crude, destructive. You have not matured. You have merely grown more dangerous. A faint, sad smile touched Kong's lips. You see a hammer and call it crude because it does not cut like a scalpel. But a scalpel cannot build a house. You exiled us for being builders. We have built. You exiled us for being adapters. We have adapted. You look at our strength and see only a threat. We see the result of being left alone in the dark. He paused, letting his words hang. We are not here to apply for membership, Counselor Valère. That time is past. The child you locked in the cellar is no longer a child. He has built his own house next door. The silence was profound. The unthinkable had been said aloud. A species was formally rejecting the Council's authority. What do you propose, then? Valère asked, the weight of millennia in his voice. A new fact, Kong said. He touched a control on his wrist. A holographic map appeared between them, showing the galaxy. A large, rough-edged swath of space, centered on Sol but stretching through red dwarfs and nebulae, glowed a steady, amber light. These are the borders of the Terran Sol Empire, as they stand. We propose a treaty. A simple one. Mutual recognition of sovereignty. Non-aggression. Defined borders. We will not enter Council space uninvited. You will not enter ours. And the Krillax? The destabilization you cause? The avian pressed. The Krillax are your problem, born from your policies of containment, Kong replied. However, if their raids cross into our space, or the space of our allies, we will destroy them. This is not an offer of help. It is a statement of fact. It is also, he added, his voice dropping just a degree, a promise. Threaten what is ours, and we will respond. Not with debate, with certainty. He looked around the chamber, meeting the multifaceted eyes, the shimmering fields, the stony faces. You feared our potential for chaos, so you tried to bury us in stillness. But energy cannot be destroyed, counselors. It can only be transformed. You transformed our hope into resolve. You have the empire you feared. Now you must decide. Will you live beside it, or will you force us to prove, once and for all, how powerful a hammer can be? There was no outburst, no protest. The council was faced with the ultimate failure of its own judgment. The exiles were not pleading. They were presenting a new reality. After a long silence, Valère spoke. We will consider your proposal, Ambassador Kong. Kong nodded again. Take your time. We have learned its value. He prepared to leave, the platform beginning to glow. But he stopped and looked once more at Valère, and then at the shimmering image of the static field generator that still, pointlessly, orbited a now-free Earth on a secondary display. A final thought, Kong said, his voice clear and carrying. You built a wall to keep us in the dark. We did not fade. We learned to see in the dark. And now we see everything very, very clearly. The light of the transporter took him. The diplomat left council space soon after, its torrent drive leaving a faint, scarring glow against the stars. Weeks later, the treaty was signed. It was not celebrated on the council worlds. It was a quiet, grim acknowledgement. The Terran Sol Empire was a sovereign power. On Mars, in her command center, Archon Lee Suman read the treaty. She then pulled up the old, century-old image of her grandfather, Lee Jun, standing defiant in this same council chamber. We honed it in the dark, she whispered to the image, echoing Kong's final report. She turned to the wide window, looking at the bustling shipyards of Mars, and the steady traffic of rugged, powerful ships. They were no longer exiles. They were no longer prisoners. They were simply Terrans. And the galaxy, once a quiet garden, now had to make room for a new kind of flower, one that had grown, not in sunlight, but in the hard, unforgiving vacuum, and had grown stronger for it. The storm had not passed. It had simply become a permanent, powerful feature of the weather.